In June 2023, GST completed 6 years. So we thought of analyzing the GST data in this episode.
In the first year, that is, in financial year 2018, every month GST collections were close to 900 billion rupees. But slowly, average collections improved.
Yes, 4 months prior to the pandemic, it even touched 1 trillion rupees a month. Now it has been 2 years since it has crossed 1 trillion rupees a month mark.
So, this has been a remarkable journey.
Yes, but let us not celebrate this yet. There's more to all of this, as you will see in this episode.
We are going to see if GST has really helped us gain more tax revenue, or are we at the same place as we were prior to the GST.
Do you want to know it? Then keep listening.
Since GST is the very latest thing in our public finances, the year on year growth rate does not make much sense. It was introduced in financial year 2018. So, in the first year, the collections were poor, but it paced in financial year 2019. And due to a lower base, you can see a whooping 60% growth in it. In FY20, it grew 4%, and then we had COVID. Therefore, the collections contracted in FY21. Again, due to the lower base of FY21, we see a huge growth of 30% and above in FY 2022. Finally, in FY23, the numbers have settled and we see a growth of 22%. Hopefully, all the data related outlier problems are behind us, and from now, we can use YOY data in much better way for analysis. Therefore, the analysis of GST is not just a regular trend analysis, but we need to understand this data in a different way to ensure we get better insights.
True. Recently, GSTN released a report on 6 years of GST, and we got a lot of useful data in it that we usually don't have access to. We have picked some distinct data from it. Let us go one by one.
Did you know there are around 1.4 crores of active GST taxpayers in the country?
25% of these taxpayers are registered in the two states of Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra alone. Next five states in order are Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Rajasthan, and Delhi. They account for 35% of total taxpayers. So, around 60% of total GST taxpayers are from these seven states.
Then, of the total taxpayers, only 44 lakhs have been migrated from the pre GST era. That means a 21% growth annually in the last 6 years in CAGR terms. So, if we analyze the state wise growth in the total taxpayers pre and post GST, we can see a massive growth in smaller states like Lakshadweep, Arunachal Pradesh, and Mizoram. However, among the larger states, Bihar, Telangana, UP, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Odisha, and Haryana have registered above average growth in total number of taxpayers.
This is a great story and quite logical too, as a lot of traditionally poorer states are growing at a faster pace. However, more developed states like Kerala, Punjab, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and Gujarat have seen a below average growth in total number of taxpayers.
This shows that poorer states have enjoyed fruits of GST, at least in terms of registrations. However, old taxpayers, that is, those migrated from the older system, have contributed much more to the government's kitty.
Yes, in this chart, we can see trend of average tax paid by old or migrated taxpayer as well as new taxpayer. Average tax paid by the old taxpayer in the last 2 years is around 4.5 lakh rupees a month, which is almost four times of the new taxpayer. Again, this should not surprise us as migrated taxpayers are the big old companies which have grown in size and scale over the years, and that means they sell more and therefore pay more tax. However, the newer firms are smaller in size and therefore will contribute lesser amounts to the treasury compared to the older firms.
This also suggests that a lot of smaller businesses have got themselves registered under the GST. Of the 1.4 crore active taxpayers, around 15 lakhs are registered under the composition scheme. Composition scheme is for smaller businesses where there are few compliance.
Right. However, turnover or sales can also tell us about the scale of the businesses. Here, we have found that around 17% of total taxpayers have an annual turnover below 5 lakh rupees. These businesses have issued hardly 1% of total invoices. As we go up the turnover levels, we see that invoices issuance have grown while their proportion in total taxpayers have reduced. The last slab of turnover, which is above 500 crore rupees, has close to 12,000 taxpayers, which is 0.1% of total taxpayers. But they account for more than 20% of total invoices issued in the month of March 2023.
Here, we can clearly see that 20% of the taxpayers issues 80% of the total invoices. It kind of follows the Pareto principle.
Yes, this is really interesting. So, all these data sets tell us that many small scale businesses have got registered on the GST platform. And as expected, their contribution to the national exchequer is low right now. And this should not surprise us as India is a land of MSMEs. This, however, hints at formalization of the economy to some extent.
Speaking of formalization, there are a couple of important steps that has helped achieve higher compliance. The growth in the number of e-way bills is quite good. Prior to COVID, around 50 million e-way bills were issued each month. Now that has gone up to 87 million.
Right. Even the return filing compliance rate has been improving. There have been multiple reports on how government is taking many steps to improve compliance as well as to reduce tax evasion. E-invoicing is such a step which has curbed evasion to a large extent.
E-voicing was introduced for the first time in India in October 2020. Businesses having average annual turnover of more than 500 crore came under the scope of e-invoicing. Slowly, this limit was reduced, and from 1st August 2023, all businesses whose average annual turnover is higher than 5 crores must comply with e-invoicing.
E-invoices are basically digitally prepared business to business or B2B invoices that have a common format so that the authentication can be done easily. It helps us in reducing data reconciliation gaps and errors. Even real-time tracking can be done due to it, and that also helps us in faster availability of input tax credits.
Now, let us see whether these steps have helped us garner tax revenue or not.
Yes, for that we have compiled indirect taxes data for central government as well as state governments. Although the classification of direct and indirect taxes is easy in the case of central government's account, it is a bit difficult to do that for all the states. So the data for central government is based on actual data for all the years. For FY23, we have used provisional data. However, the state's data up to FY21 is calculated as state taxes on commodities and services, which is one of the headings in the state finances, less state excise duty, which is usually on alcohol and petroleum. So, state data for FY22 and FY23 has been extrapolated based on provisional data of a sample of 18 large states.
Such adjustment has been made as taxes like excise duty on alcohol and petroleum still exist. That is, they are not subsumed in GST, and therefore pre and post GST will include these elements. And therefore, taking it out will kind of give us a slightly better picture. We understand that this is not an apples to apples kind of comparison, but this is the best we could do to compare the progress of indirect taxes in the country.
So we add central and state indirect taxes and compare its growth with India's nominal GDP. We can clearly see that the growth in indirect taxes is directly proportional to the growth in GDP.
Yes, you can see that until 2003, indirect taxes grew around 10% CAGR on average. By 2011, the pace of growth improved along with the GDP growth. From FY11 to FY15, indirect taxes and nominal GDP both grew at 13 to 14%. From FY19 onwards, we have seen a drop in both indirect taxes and nominal GDP. GST got introduced in FY18. After that, both GDP and indirect taxes have been growing at a lower rate compared to the previous phases.
Interesting. So basically, as economy grows, tax collection improves. India's so-called golden period of growth, which was between 2000 and 2008, delivered higher growth and therefore has higher tax collection. That means focusing on economic growth is indeed important.
Right. Let us look at the same data with a twist in it. Now, we have used the same total indirect taxes of central and states and calculated the trend relative to the GDP. Indirect taxes percentage of GDP is a common way to analyze any tax growth. Such a measure gives us a perfect picture of the trend in indirect taxes.
So the periods mentioned in this chart are not equal as we have faced COVID in between. So we analyze 20 years before GST and the period after its introduction. So on average, we can see that in the period from 1998 to 2007, indirect taxes were 9.7% of GDP. In the decade just prior to GST introduction, that is from 2008 to 2017, this ratio dipped a bit to 9.5% after GST's introduction, but before COVID, it almost touched 10%.
In the COVID years, it fell back to 9.5% and rose again as restrictions opened. Now it is 10% of GDP.
Right. So as of now, even if this is not a like to like comparison of the indirect tax data, we can see that trend is improving. But it is not a remarkable or an outstanding feat. But nonetheless, we can be optimistic about the future.
If we see state wise growth in the state GST figures over the last 6 years, we can see that some smaller and northeastern states top the list. Amongst the largest states, Odisha and Kerala achieved 16% and 14% growth in the last 6 years. They were followed by Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Haryana, Karnataka, and Gujarat with 11 to 13% growth rates.
Uttarakhand, Himachal, and Jharkhand registered sub 8% growth in this period. Now, let us see how much this has changed relative to state GDP.
This chart shows us that in the last 5 years, state GST as a percentage of GSDP has decreased in four large states like Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Telangana. However, it has increased in Jharkhand, Punjab, Kerala, Haryana, Maharashtra, and Odisha. In most of the large states, the ratio has remained more or less same.
We could not find any typical pattern as to what kind of states have benefited from GST. Some states have shown a large improvement in registrations, some in revenue, while some as a percentage of GSDP.
Yes, one can argue that when the GST was introduced, there was an initial shock to the system, and thus collections were lower. And if you remember, there was this famous debate as to whether India is in cyclical slowdown or a structural slowdown at that time. So, sluggish economic growth might have impacted GST collections too. Later, one can also blame COVID for the bad results.
Yes, both these arguments are accepted. We are just saying that for any tax growth, economic conditions have to be good enough to increase the tax buoyancy.
We have seen how close economic growth and tax collections growth are. So, we hope that economic recovery might change this current trend.
True. We don't intend to signal that GST was a bad idea altogether. Yes, there are some flaws and pain points that need to be sorted. But
Right.
as of today, we don't see any distinct or revolutionary output after GST. Even after the collections are growing 1.5 trillion rupees a month. Higher registration and return filing show formalization and compliance within the economy, which is a great thing in itself. But that does not necessarily mean that can push tax collections upwards consistently and considerably.
The GST chapter has not ended yet. Economic growth, tax rate rationalization, and actual ease of doing businesses can give us the results that we expect.
Yes, unfortunately, right now, there is no happy ending to this episode.
But we promise that we will continue to bring insightful topics every week. Thank you for watching this. If you loved it, then do share this with others.
And don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you.
Thank you.